Hello.
Hello, hang tough. I think we got music.
This is the People's War.
FreedomSlips.com, the #1 listener-supported talk radio station, throwing ourselves upon the gears of the machine. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
Or someone you know suffer from poor circulation, shortness of breath, or chest pains. Are you looking for a more natural solution to help overcome these problems? People tell us that after just a few months taking Extendivite, their doctors have noticed unexplainable improvements in their overall health. For more information, visit heartdrop.com or call 1-877-928-8822.
Extend your life with and Nighthawk sent you, because if you call this number and tell them Nighthawk sent you, you'll get $5 off your first order at extendivite.com. Thank you. The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and FreedomSlips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to one radio. We were.
Well, hello everyone. I think I'm on the air. It's time for Ohio Exopolitics once again. I'm your host, Mark Snyder. I've got Stephen Woods on the line and Solon waiting. Both are waiting in the background. I'm going to launch off on one of my tirades for just a little while. Not really a tirade, but I'm going to talk once again about the creational natural laws. I had a listener send me a message. I think his name was Adrian, that thought it was really important to cover these creational natural laws. And I think I agree. Remember, our universe has a universal consciousness. It's neutral positive. It's neither good nor bad. It has no gender. It really doesn't have a personality. It's not a father figure. It's not a mother nature. It does, however, radiate love. And that is the first creational natural law. And when I speak of love, I'm talking about the highest form of love, which is called effective love. It's a love that is not romantic. Romantic love is very unstable. People that are involved in romantic love often will be at each other's throats in a very short time. We're talking about a love that's based on respect and reverence. And that's the kind of love that radiates from our universal consciousness, which is sometimes referred to by an unusual German term called a Wesenheiten. And because our universal consciousness is really not the God that's portrayed by religions. The religions portray a God the Father that is omniscient. Now, our universe is actually evolving. It's learning, you might say, even though its wisdom is far greater than we can even imagine. And it radiates love. For example, one of the very important things that Billy's written in what's called Love Letter 27 is that love is the highest principle in all creation, and through it everything exists in absolute logic. There's an absolute logic to love, if it's effective love. And what it refers to is the concept of live and help live. So we shouldn't be live and let live, because that means you're going to live and let die too. Live and help live means you're going to try to help your fellow man, animals, and plants to also prosper. See, this is the kind of love that's universal. Love, there's several that are very interesting in Love Letter 27. It says that every creature, for example, every tiny plant, every tiny animal, fulfills its purpose in love. And love will forever be the purpose of our existence. The incredible splendor of nature is the visible expression of the love of creation. So the universal consciousness expresses this love when you see its creativity, when you see the beauty of nature. That's the first creational natural law. The second creational natural law is the law of striving. The law of striving is very interesting. It's the fundamental law of all evolution. Without striving, there is no life, and without striving, there is no happiness either. So if you want to have more happiness in your life, if you're going through depression right now, I prescribe work for you. It might be cleaning out your garage or your closet to start out with, but the more intensely that you can strive, ultimately there'll be a satisfaction associated with that striving. And let me read a little something from page 100 of one of Billy's books called The Way to Live. He says, as in the case with the creation itself, every single vasen of any kind, from the very first breath to its very last, also strives for that which is higher, for evolution and completion. Every moment in the existence of a vasen or an individual is just as much directed at striving as the entire being of the creation itself. The creation itself, as well as all its creatures and Wesenheiten, is imbued with the power of striving. In order to attain success in the future, progress in that which is higher, striving is the power of the spiritual as well as the physical. So if you're going through a time in your life when you're depressed or unhappy or stressed, immerse yourself in striving. This is the second creational natural law. Striving is the very nature of the human being. Striving will give you back a sense of life. Now, there's a caveat with that. There's this third creational natural law called the law of harmony, which says everything has a bipolar structure and composition. Everything that exists has a positive and the negative. And Billy says the positive and the negative are two forces which belong together and should never be separated because they depend on one another. So when you're in the law of harmony, the law of harmony is that you should be thinking in a neutral, positive way, not too positive and definitely not negative. If you're striving, but you're not thinking in a neutral, positive way, then your striving turns into something that's unpleasant. So remember that the next time you're striving and you suddenly feel yourself getting tired or angry or whatever, think about the law of harmony and look towards introspection, because introspection is one of the laws that we should be following all the time in relation to the law of harmony. You should be able to look inward to evaluate your feelings, because your feelings usually come from your thoughts, and thoughts will also be generated by feelings at times. So if you have a negative feeling, a feeling that's uncomfortable, then focus on the law of harmony. So that's telling you that some thought that you had, it may be a preconscious thought, it's possible it could even be a subconscious thought. But if you focus, it's usually a conscious thought that just went in there so quickly, it started to generate feelings that made you uncomfortable. Well, that thought that you just had may be what Billy refers to as an unvalue or an IDEA. And it's not fully completed. It's not complete yet. It's unripe. And be careful about these ideas that are not completely evolved, that get in your head. And if you notice yourself behaving compulsively, then you're probably in violation of the law of harmony. If also, never take yourself too seriously, or never take anything that arises in relation to you too seriously, because if you do, you will do very great harm to yourself. That's another thing I just learned from studying the Meyer case. It's something I've done many times in my life, is taking myself too seriously or taking other things that I'm doing too seriously. So we've got the law of love, which is effective love, love based on respect, based on veneration. You've got the law of striving that says always work, always focus on your work. Without no striving, there is no life, there is no sense of life, there is no happiness. The law of harmony says think in a neutral, positive way all the time. And if you feel yourself, you say you just woke up in the morning and you're grumpy and you've got some anxiety and you're not very happy, well, work on memorizing some things that you can use to refocus your thoughts. For example, I say, I'm confident, I'm optimistic, I'm relaxed, I'm cheerful, I'm enthusiastic. And those are all concepts from Billy's book, The Might of Thoughts. And these are verbatim from the book. I say, I'm the master of my own destiny. I'm the forger of my own fortune. I create my own good luck. I do not allow my thoughts to drift. I steer my thoughts like a captain steers his ship. I strengthen my thoughts. I nurture my thoughts. I clarify my thoughts. I make them more valuable and purposeful. And it is the nature of thought that by its might alone, anything, any conceivable thing can be brought to fruition. So that's the law of harmony. The fourth creational natural law that I'm going to talk about is the law of universal creation. What does that mean? It means that every thought that is enlivened by might and power must, as a cause, also bring a quite certain effect. The effect of the thought is directly proportional to its might and power. So if you're having thoughts that are powerful, they're going to have an effect that's directly proportional to the might of the thoughts. Now, you could be thinking negatively. You could be thinking in a neutral positive way. If you're thinking in a neutral positive way, then you'll have good circumstances come into your life. If you're thinking in a negative way, you're going to have bad circumstances come into your life. So you should always think in a neutral, positive way. Now, there's something called the law of provision. It's on page 296 of the Might of Thoughts. Now, the law of provision, now let me say something about these creational natural laws. If you're striving and you're starting to get miserable, it's because the law of harmony is not being followed, okay? Maybe you're following the law of love and suddenly, while your love's falling apart. Well, maybe you switched over to romantic love and didn't realize it. Well, with the law of provision, that also depends on other creational natural laws too being followed. For example, we have 7.5 billion people on our planet. That's way, way too many. Even though you can fit them all in Texas, you can't feed them is the problem. There's not enough space to feed 7.5 billion people, and we'll go over that later, but I'll just jump into it quickly because it's important creational natural law. Even though the elite is definitely trying to kill us, there's no question. They want to reduce the world's population, and their motivation is because they can't control 7.5 billion people. Well, the Meyer information says 7.5 billion people is actually 8.5 billion. The Playar and tell us we've got 1 more billion people than we realize. And these people are going to destroy all of nature if we continue with this kind of population. So bear with me just a little bit. If you have 7 billion people, you're going to all put them in Texas. You're going to make them Texans so they can eat beef. But we're going to not give them a lot of beef. We're only going to give them 1 cow. 1,200-pound steer produces 500 pounds of meat. So a person lives 100 years, they get 5 pounds of meat a year, which isn't very much. If you live 50 years, you get 10 pounds of meat a year. But in any case, every cow should have 2 acres to graze on. Well, if you've got 7 billion people, 7 billion cows, 1 cow for each person, you give them 2 acres, that's 14 billion acres, which is a lot. If you go out on the web, convert that into square miles, that's over 21 million square miles. Yeah, you can fit all the people in Texas in the world. All the people in Texas. All the people in the world will go into Texas. But if you're going to feed them just a little bit of meat, you're going to use all the space in South America, Mexico, United States, Alaska, Canada, and Russia. And that's only a little bit of meat. That doesn't count how you're going to feed them with corn, and how you're going to feed them with wheat, and how you're going to feed them with vegetables. We haven't even gotten there. So the law of provision says it must be heeded that the law of provision is actually only functions for those human beings who live according to it. So we're not living according to it because we've got, well, probably 8.5 billion people on our planet. In the next hour, Frosty Wooldridge is going to talk about this. It is clear that it can't be doubted by this or that human being, yet only because there is no understanding of the principle, which is based on the fact that prosperity and abundance are first and foremost of an inner nature. So if your prosperity is of an inner nature, you eventually have external prosperity. And this is expressed in joy, peace, love, freedom, and harmony. And then only secondly as material wealth and so on. So a little bit of a tangent. I'm going to pull my first hour guests in here in a second. Thanks for listening, guys. Another thing in terms of population, could it be that our gigantic population is causing our medical community to be overwhelmed? Do doctors have too many patients? Well, the third leading cause of death in the U.S., most doctors don't want to talk about. A recent Johns Hopkins study claims that 250,000 people in the U.S. die every year from medical errors. Others claim the numbers to be as high as 440,000. So we got somewhere between 250,000 and 440,000 people dying a year because of medical mistakes. Medical errors are the third leading cause of death after heart disease and cancer. So, another way that population may be affecting us. And I want to bring on Stephen. Let's bring on Stephen Woods. I think he's only going to be here for the first hour anyway. Stephen, how are you today?
Hey, I'm doing great, Mark. How about you?
I'm hanging in there, man. What did you think about that population, the number of people that are dying now from medical mistakes? They give this example of this little girl. This is so sad. She had cancer, and they were treating her, with chemotherapy, which I don't like anyway. And she was actually doing pretty good. She was responding, and then some person made a mistake on the last treatment and gave her like 20 times too much.
Oh, no.
Yeah, she died. They got her picture there. So maybe part of the problem, I'm not saying this is the whole problem, but maybe part of the problem is that these doctors are seeing, they're trying to see 500 patients or something crazy. I don't know. It's just a speculation. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, I can see that we're all human and we all are susceptible to making mistakes, especially if you get overburdened. So,
right. Absolutely. Solon, do you have any comments on any of the stuff I've said about the creation of natural laws or about overpopulation?
Well, I know that we also have a problem where the teachers are overwhelmed.
Oh,
And,
really?
Oh yeah. I've had some friends tell me about being in some of the school systems when they were living in the city, and a lot of the kids would just get real rowdy and crazy, and the teacher would try to settle down 30 something people, and by the time they were able to settle them all down, it would be time for the next class. And I was watching something that was actually talking about some of the teachers having to prepare meals and clothes for some of the students because they were either ill-dressed or they were hungry and they weren't able to focus and they were having a hard time participating.
Do you remember what state this was in? Or what city or what part of the country?
No, I think it was an article. I think it was actually a video I watched on, I don't know if it was Vice News or it was on PBS, come to think of it. It's been some years now. I remember it being from the north, but I don't remember what city. I apologize.
The Meyer people, the Figu people, also talk about how population is affecting the biosphere and it's affecting the climate. And aren't you guys down there in North Carolina getting hit with gigantic snowstorms and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, recently I live to the part where it just got mostly rain because it was a little bit too warm for the snow. But you go an hour from here and people were just it was snow and slush and ice on the roads. It was and it just got done raining actually here. We just got another inch of rain.
And it's kind of weird because it's hitting the southern United States right now, isn't it? A lot of these snowstorms, which is really weird.
I think it has something to do with the El Nino, but it's crazy.
And did you guys? I know you weren't hit, but I mean, some parts of North Carolina had like a foot of snow or something, didn't they?
Yeah. I know a person who's about an hour and 20 minutes away from me, and they had 3 inches of snow. And yeah, he was having a hard time driving or going anywhere for about 3 days.
And you guys got a lot of mountains down there too, don't you?
Yeah, well, we kind of have a little bit of everything. You have the coast, then you have like the plains, and you have the foothills, and then you have the mountains. So you have a little bit of everything in the state.
And I hear you guys don't want anyone else to come down there, right?
You know, Mark, I actually have something to say about that.
Okay.
I've lived in North Carolina my whole life, so this is like what I know.
Yeah.
And so is my dad. And I'd watch my dad as a little kid wave to everyone, and some people having no clue what that even meant. And as I've gotten older, you get into the city, which at that point was like suburbs. And it's like there's so many people who are not from here and who don't understand that there's like this greeting thing that used to always be here. And so you kind of have like a lot of clashing going on with people that are foreign, and they come here and they have their own ideas of how things are. And it's been a big struggle for me, but
Now, when you guys in North Carolina talk about foreign people, you're talking about anyone that's out of state, right?
yes,
I mean, someone
I
from
know it
Ohio,
sounds crazy.
someone
I
from
know that
Ohio is
sounds
a
like,
foreigner, right? I would be a foreigner.
well, I would say a lot of the people I've met from Ohio had that friendliness to them, which
Okay.
here in the South, there's a lot of friendliness. I mean, it comes with some religious stuff, but there's a lot of friendliness, greeting your neighbors and saying hey and getting to know them, and a lot of sharing. And I've learned with the northern people, you have to become very personal with them. And then once they like get to know you, then they open up. And that's just kind of opposite from how it's always been. So you have a lot of different, clashing going on of things, and it causes a lot of struggle and heartache.
Well, we're getting people from all over the world coming in. But what's really good? A lot of the Mexican migrants have been turned away. A lot of the South American people that were trying to get in. The thousands of people that were coming up through the Mexico, and they were trying to get in through the Texas border. Trump was able to turn a lot of those people away, which I think is a very good thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they're breaking laws. So yeah.
The other thing is here in, and I know what they're doing. These global elite, they know that. I really believe that their plan is to overwhelm the United States with immigration and to break down our culture, because they're going to bring people in that have no desire to learn English and won't assimilate our culture. And this is by design. This is one way they're going to weaken the United States. And I know that one of the Enoch prophecies that Billy has, he talks about the coming civil war, where the United States will have 2 civil wars and will be broken into 5 different areas. When I first started studying the Meyer material, I just couldn't give that any seriousness at all. Now it's just so obviously could happen. I'm just. What do you think of all that, Solon?
Well, I mean, just like what I was saying, being a Southerner and getting to know all these other cultures, it's very clear to me that there is differences here in the United States. And I think now we're into a period where people are less likely to talk to one another. They're trying to find people who are similar, and they're building these groups of people who have the same idea. And I think that this is going to lead to some problems because there's a lack of talking and there's more rage towards one another.
Rage seems to be the most common experience. It's so funny. As I've said before, I'm a software guy, and one of our testers, man, we use Google Hangouts, and to communicate, because, people live all over the country and people work out of their homes sometimes. And there's this one guy who's a tester, and you can put up little icons, on, you don't have to show yourself, you can show an icon. And he has this interesting icon of like someone banging their head on a wall. And he says, despite all my rage. And that's what he has as his little caption. So there is a lot of rage in the world. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. Well, I also think people are overworked in this country, and so that causes even more like stress in them, where they want to take action.
Yeah. Stephen, I haven't brought you in a while. Please join us if you have any comment.
Yeah, I think look, the law of harmony.
Yeah.
I look at our country right now and I say, well, I see it bifurcated between the far right and the far left, and you don't see too many moderate voices being heard.
Yeah, I don't. I think this is done on purpose. I think the mainstream media is now controlled by the deep state. What do you think?
For sure. Yeah, you're getting a message that they want you to hear, but I think slowly but surely, though, like some of the links I think I've shared with you, there's a group of people that are looking for that common ground, that neutral position that you can listen to other people's opinions and take it all in and make an informed decision, without listening to the radical people on the left or the right. So I think there's a growing need for that, and I think people recognize that and are willing to put forth the effort it takes to hear all the facts and to make an informed decision. Instead of just the standard news today, you only have 8 or 10 minutes possibly to hear a point, and it's hard to get all the details that you need to make a good decision. And so it's always little plug lines that don't lead you to a good decision.
Do you ever use the search engine Bing?
I have, but not all the time, no.
I got so fed up with Google because I could tell if I would search for certain things, like people on the right, if I search for someone on the right, I'd get all of this extremely negative stuff about them. I wouldn't get, like you were talking about, I want a neutral, unbiased opinion, and I couldn't get that. So I just got fed up and stopped using Google, so I started using Bing. And it's a little bit better in some ways, but you're right. I mean, it's just, you can't get objective information anymore. It's just, I don't know what, it is done intentionally. The people in control of the deep state are trying to create the civil war in the United States, and I can just see it so clearly. Solon, what do you think?
Oh man. No, there's definitely a problem with biased news nowadays. It's almost best to get it right from the person who is saying it, rather than someone that's writing about what they said. For instance, last week tonight, the John Oliver show, I really used to like his show, and he was talking about some gun right advocates, and he was like, beating up on this channel that they have for this, which I'm not going to advertise for it. But anyhow, one of the guys came on to Joe Rogan's show and was presenting, his case that he was a person that, he was saying didn't exist, that was also for, this, the rights for this. And he was very upset with the fact that that he steered, his motive in one way and was not very, equal about it. So he had an agenda or pushed his opinion on people. And I think that this is becoming so common now, and since people aren't doing enough research about this, that people are digesting this as this has to be the truth.
It's very interesting that you brought up the gun thing, because the people in Switzerland, I mean, the average person has a lot of guns because that's their military, right?
Yeah, I think you have to serve. All people from Switzerland, citizens, have to serve in the military. I don't know if it's men only, but I know that you have to service a couple years or so in there.
Well, people who haven't listened to this show very much, just to kind of fill you in. Billy Meyer, Edward Albert Meyer, he lives in Switzerland. He lives about 35 minutes east of Zurich. He lives in a place called Hinterschmidruti, which is behind Schmidruti, which is this beautiful tiny mountain village. And it's very interesting how the Meyer information is kind of integrated with that whole culture from Switzerland. Solon, have you been there? I have not been there yet.
No, I'm trying to make a trip, but yeah, I have not yet. No.
Yeah,
I do want to say that the word hinter in German means behind. So when you say Hinterschmidruti, it's literally behind Schmidruti.
So I could say Hinterschmidruti, and then everyone should know.
If they know German.
Stephen, do you have any comments? No?
No, just listening right now. Sorry.
Okay,
Trying to keep the background noise down. I got a lot of kids over.
Okay, yeah. You may not be here the second hour, right?
Or even sooner, possibly. The guys are rolling in right now. So.
Okay. Yeah, bail when you have to. That's
okay.
Sure. No problem. But the whole thing with guns is very interesting because, first of all, and this is, people would think this is crazy, I think the deep state is behind some of these shootings. And I think that some of these shootings have been staged. They're not real events. The person to talk to about this is Dr. Jim Fetzer, who wrote a book. Now, this is a guy who has a PhD, and he's got like a PhD, something analogous to computer science. I mean, he's a very down-to-earth kind of guy. He said no one died at Sandy Hook. That's the name of his book. And he's got like 6 other PhDs that are on his book that make the same argument. So this is how brainwashed we are right now. There's so much disinformation that is being put out. And I think the CIA and the NSA, and I'm just saying that's probably enough to get me knocked off the air, but I think they're involved in this whole thing. I think the United States is really, we've been taken over from within. And I'm still amazed at this because I can remember 2 or 3 years ago reading the Enoch prophecies and thinking, I just can't see this happening. Things certainly have changed, haven't they, Solon?
Yeah, well, I feel like we've become aware. I think it's always been here. I just think we've become aware of this, and so many whistleblowers have come out now.
Yeah. Even with I think the Enoch prophecies specifically say that Paris will fall.
Yeah.
And isn't it like total chaos in Paris right now?
Yeah, it seems that they're taking over like inside the government and then also outside of all the discord, and you're starting to see that kind of unfold right now, which is kind of scary.
Now, I'm a person. I'm not an official member of FIGU. I haven't went to Switzerland, but I study this stuff like my life depends on it, and I think it does in many ways. And when I looked at these Enoch prophecies 2 or 3 years ago, I would read this like, I just don't see how this can be real. And in such a short time, so much of this is coming to fruition. Like the fires in California, I harp on this all the time. I talk about it too much. It's not just California, it's Oregon, it's the western United States. 7,000 fires in California this year. It's 1.6 million acres burned. Our forests are being wiped out, and 250,000 people, almost 400,000 by some accounts, people are dying from going to the doctor. Well, somewhere in all this mess, we're not getting the real story. Would you agree, Solon?
Yeah, I'd say a lot of this is probably new for scientists.
Now, what do you mean? I don't follow you.
Well, I don't think a lot of us, or I shouldn't say us, but us human beings here on Earth, this is the first time that we are able to understand like how the climate functions. You know, what happens when the jet stream changes, and I mean, we're like advancing in science because of all this. I mean, it's a horrible way to advance in it, but we're learning so much.
You know, the good thing about some of this, like that 4ocean.com group, their stuff is all over YouTube now. Those people are advertising like crazy, which is great because they're taking all the plastic out of the ocean.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, have you seen any of that?
I know there's a lot of companies that are starting to come up now with
Really?
all kinds of ideas. Yeah, I've heard of two of them so far. There's one that's dropping a net. There's another company that's like making all these like giant buoys that'll have the plastic fall in there, and then they'll make like these little small byproducts of plastic, which is like plastic currency, and then resell it.
Hmm.
So there's all kinds of companies coming out now and trying to clean up the oceans.
That's very, very good. And there is also a wall of trees that's being planted in Africa to try to stop the desertification of that planet or that continent, which I think is a really encouraging thing. Now, so long, we've only got 20 minutes left or 18 minutes left in the first hour. And the second hour, Frosty's going to come on and we're going to really pound on immigration and we're going to pound on overpopulation. But why I've got you here, I want to get back on the Meyer material specifically. And we can go to this latest article that's been translated and we can talk about that. Or we can, if you have something else you want to talk about, we can focus on that. Which way do you want to go here?
Well, I'd like to just add what you were saying about the trees, with the desertification.
Okay.
I think China, I really feel like their understanding of just the impact this is going to have, and are also changing some of their deserts. They're actually paying a lot of their farmers to go out and plant licorice sticks. They look like just walls of like sticks all in the desert, and they're finding that these licorice sticks actually regrow the soil, which will allow more and more trees to form.
Oh, now you're saying a licorice stick, like the kind
Yes.
you eat?
Yes.
What? Seriously?
Well, I can explain a little bit of it since I come from a permaculture background.
Okay.
It's a nitrogen fixing plant, which means that it puts nitrogen into the ground. And a lot of things require nitrogen, just like we human beings require protein in order to build hair and muscle and, so much that we have. Well, plants require the nitrogen to put on leaves and bark and whatnot. So they're finding that they put these things in the ground, and what they're doing is that they're trying to start these first, and then they're going to come back and grow more things on top of it.
Well, so they're trying to create soil instead of sand, right?
Yes. So all life in terms of plant life starts really in the soil first, and then from there, it's a lot like the gut of a human being. This is how I understand it within myself. It's like the gut of the human being. At one point we were in our mom's gut. That's also, if this ever gets weak, we get weak since we understand the immune system also plays a role. And it's very similar to that. So the soil, they're trying to reclaim the desert by reclaiming the soil there.
That's great. That's great. That's a good analogy to probiotics in the human body.
Yes. And you can destroy that, and we understand now that you can rebuild it. But there's so many ways of going about this where you don't have to destroy, and you can be in harmony with it.
Does I think that a lot of the chlorine in the water systems destroys people's guts, destroys the probiotic stuff in our stomachs. Is that true?
Yeah, actually, we were a friend of mine, we were looking up if chlorine can penetrate the skin, and it actually can. And if people pay attention when they come out of it, they do feel weak because it is actually a poison to us human beings.
So we're putting a poison in our water system, chlorine.
Yeah, but it's not just that. It's also in pools. I mean, we put more of it in pools than anywhere. It's more concentrated there.
Yeah.
And we all get in a pool, and I always get out and feel a little sick sometimes. And
it's terrible. What is wrong with us, man? We are killing ourselves.
It's probably a lot cheaper than it would be to just put salt in there and try to regulate it that way. So, I mean, there's just so many of us that it's just a faster way of doing this, and probably a lot more easier.
The whole idea of the fact that we're destroying our biosphere left and right. I'm glad we're making that more aware on this program. Yeah,
it's a problem. I mean, I don't think that a lot of people are aware of just how bad it is right now.
Mm-hmm.
And then we constantly talk about if we reduce it by 2 degrees, which is Celsius, and here in the United States, 2 degrees Fahrenheit isn't as big of a deal. But when you look at that for what it really is, it's very hot. Or it's different. It's zone changing.
Yeah, and it's really weird, interesting what's happening in the climate here in the United States, because it's like the big storms, the snowstorms are hitting the South and the Eastern United States.
Yeah, I just feel like we're getting more moisture here. It's like it left the West Coast and has now made more of it here on the east side of the United States. And based off of a map I seen, there's a lot of people leaving the West Coast and coming to the East Coast.
Yeah.
So there's a massive exodus in this country where there's. I feel like the states that are really nice right now are growing in population. So that's also another problem is that, I listen to so much climate stuff and no one talks about the population. And one guy actually talked about our energy crisis, which I was trying to get Frosty to look at.
Oh, yes. I want to talk about that. And we'll bring this up next hour. I did a little research on what Frosty was saying about how many barrels of oil that we're burning, and he's actually being conservative. From what I'm seeing, the world is consuming 99.5 million barrels of oil per year. That's 400,000 barrels per hour, over 1,000 barrels per second. And if for example, we're getting $70 a barrel for oil, that means these oil companies, the revenue, just the pure revenue, I don't know what their costs are, but they're making pure revenue of over $80,000 per second.
Wow.
It's beyond belief, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was told a contact note. I wasn't going to bring this up, but I was told a contact note from it. I don't know if it's been translated or not, which probably shouldn't, but that by year 2050, based off of when this contact note was given, we will be out of oil. And that's not very long from right now.
No, that's
so. And you have a lot of protests about people saying keep it in the ground, and so I don't know if people realize, but I mean, without transportation of all these goods being moved back and forth, and with the growing overpopulation, this is just a disaster that's going to take place.
Yeah, because the whole capitalist system functions on making money at the present, so they don't make decisions that are consistent with the health of nature, the health of people. It's all about making as much money as they can right now.
Yeah. Yeah, Billy's. Have you seen Billy's predictions he made about the coming future, like recent futures and
His most recent stuff?
yeah, he called it. He had two visions.
Yeah, I looked at that quickly. If you remember anything, I don't remember
Oh,
that
I
much.
remember almost all of it.
Okay,
It just
well, share it with us.
well, you had actually talked about the deep state becoming aware that there's too many people,
Hmm.
and in there it says that they will eventually come to the point, all of them, that there is too many people, and they will actually end up genetically engineering a virus that'll enter us from skin, air, um, from all kinds of different ways of it entering our into us and killing us slowly.
Oh, great.
Yeah, and
You
but
just
the weird.
you just
Go
made
ahead.
my day so long. Thank you.
Well, I know I'm trying to stay away from the gloomy stuff, but the problem is there just is too many people. I mean, I just watched a documentary about people in China are living in cages, and I'm
What?
like, yeah, yeah, I know, right? You're like, what? And a lot of I've even talked about someone about this, and they didn't believe that it was an actual cage. And I was like, well, it was a cage. And they had a hallway, and these people were just in cages watching television, laying down their bed, and they like
Why?
shared a bathroom, a
Okay,
small.
okay. You got to explain yourself here. Why is China putting people in cages?
Okay, well, the problem is that they have a growing population, and they can't build enough houses anymore. I mean, they got skyrise tall, just massive already, and there's just so many people.
Are they putting people in cages so they don't
Well,
reproduce?
the Chinese government is not. These people are trying to find places to live, and they're like $3,000 for a cage, which is affordable apparently for the. I think it's a lot of these people are retired, and I think they get maybe 6,000. So it's like half their pay is going to living in a cage. But as human beings, we do need a place to like go to sleep at.
Stephen,
It's sad.
Stephen
If
is.
you think if anybody in the U.S. thinks they have it bad, you just need to look at some of the stuff that happens in China. It's real crazy because as you're watching the documentary, these Chinese people are extremely healthy. I mean, they're nice to one another. It's like
Oh my
it's
gosh.
mind blowing.
But they put each other in cages.
Well, Well, the biggest problem is that they no longer have. They have a waiting list for people to put their ashes because they can no longer bury anybody anymore because they kind of run out of room for that. And it's so expensive that people just do the cremation, and they're running out of room to put the cremation. I mean, that's how many people they have. And I'm like, wow. They're talking about how expensive it is, and they're trying to make these churches where they can just dump their urns like in a location, but even that's like too much. The demand is too much.
Okay, next hour, when. Are you going to stay the next hour or so on?
I should be able to. Yeah.
Okay, if you can't, you can't. It's no problem. I can bring it up myself. I want you to bring up the cages in China for Frosty. I want to hear what he says on this. Stephen, you were saying something about it's like animal control facilities or something?
I just gave my. I'm sorry. I'm a retired police officer, so our animal control facility, all the cages and things for the cats and dogs. And that's kind of what it reminded me of,
Oh my
unfortunately.
God. So, Solon, you're saying they're trying to cremate all the bodies?
Well, when someone dies, in China, they burn them, the cremation. I want to say in the Maya material, it talks about how important it is to actually bury the body because
Yes.
there's fluid forces that are on each bone and everything part of you, and you have
Yes.
access to this after reincarnation.
Right. You
But
somehow your subconscious makes a back connection to your previous skeleton. Yeah,
yeah,
and they don't go into it in great detail, but it's very important.
it's very yeah. But the problem is in China, it's so expensive to bury a person because they've run out of room for this.
My
That they
God.
they result to cremation, but it's so expensive to store the ashes places that there's waiting lists for these things.
A waiting list to be cremated?
No, to store the ashes. So
Oh.
so I mean, if you're living in a cage, you're going to have a hard time storing ashes, and not everyone is living in a cage.
I can't help but laugh. Person willfully living in a cage.
It was. I mean, they got these pods now, which look really cool, and they're talking about how nice these are for apartments. I'm looking at this and I'm like, I got it made living in my house. Like you feel bad.
They got pods. People are living in pods and cages.
Yeah.
We call those jails here.
Right, exactly. That's the animal control facility.
Oh.
Yeah.
It's gotten so bad. It's humorous. It's just a tragedy.
Well, I guess what scares me about this is that this will be our future in this state if we don't correct, populate. If you want to see what it's like to manage this many people, just look at China where they got these 18 road highways, and yet they have traffic that sometimes lasts 3-4 weeks.
I've told this story before. When first time Frosty told me about 52 lanes of traffic around Beijing, I just didn't believe him. I couldn't put my mind around it, and he sent me the links on YouTube, and you can see from the helicopter view these 52 lanes around Beijing. I can't imagine it, man. Every day I hit the worst traffic in Columbus when I come home, and it's like 3 different expressways merging, and it's so dangerous. And I hate literally to drive in that. But I can't imagine. I mean, it's only like 6, 7, 8 lanes, it's nothing. But compared to what it is in China with 52 lanes, and you're saying you've heard of 18 lanes in just a normal. Gosh, so crazy.
Yeah. Well, and what's going on here is that the demands for, these roads, which was also something Billy talked about, they'll build these new roads, but what'll happen is that they'll need to build more because the population has grown since the planning of it. They built for the population they had then and not for the future population.
My goodness. You know something? I'm going to see if Frosty's around right now. I don't know. Well, he's green. I might try to pull him in now. Since we're talking about cages in China, I bet he'll get a kick out of this. Since we're not going to probably talk too much about the Meyer material, we've only got like a minute left, right? Till the music starts, something like that?
About 3 or so, yeah.
Okay, let me try to pull him in and see if we can get him in. He's out there. So we'll see if he picks up. He may be away from his computer, which is okay. But can you tell us any more about these cages cages in China?
Well, apparently you don't need a license to build these things if it's under 10 people. So there's somewhat of like regulations, but I mean, I think the government's aware that the population is growing and they're not able to build public housing fast enough. And the list is, outrageous.
Why are they putting people in cages? I still don't get this.
Well,
why a cage? They don't want them to go out and produce any more people.
Hi, Mark. I'm right here.
Hey, Frosty, how you doing, man? I wanted to bring you on a little bit early because Solon brought up the most incredible thing that I've ever heard about. They're putting people in China in cages now. Have you heard about any of this?
Yeah, I've had a little a whiff of that, but I have not documented it, or have I have any support for that. I do know that China is now literally gauging everybody on their good acts and their bad acts, and they get plus or minus on their dossier. So there's all sorts of things going on over there. And of course, the key is they've got 1.4 billion people, and control is the only way that they can keep that society moving somewhat in the same direction.
Are they putting them in a cage so they can't reproduce?
I just don't know enough. I don't have any facts. I don't have any information on those cage things. I've just got a small whiff of it, but I haven't had time to pursue it. I've just got so many other things that I am, working on.
Okay, there's the music. We're going to take a 5-minute break, and then we'll be back, folks. Hello, guys. Are we back?
Right here.
Okay, hold on a second. I'm just going to double check and see if we're really back or not. Sometimes you can't tell with the server if we're really back on the air, but there is a way for me to check real quick. And we probably are back. We got a few minutes. Hang tough.
Okay. Relish the highs, endure the lows, and savor the in-between times. Sunrises that light the sky with promise.
We got a few minutes. Hang tough.
Okay.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. Join me, the best, inside the ice. Saturday morning at 1 o'clock a.m.
Sunrises that light the sky with promise.
Do you or someone you know suffer from poor circulation, shortness of breath, or chest pains? Are you looking for a more natural solution to help overcome these problems? People tell others have noticed unexplainable improvements in their overall health. For more information, visit heartdrop.com or call 1-877-928-8822.
Extend your life with Extend Your Life.
Call this number and tell them Nighthawk sent you. You'll get $5 off your first order at extendedbite.com. The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listeners radio, and now we return you to your host.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you back to Ohio Exopolitics. And we've got Frosty Wooldridge back on the line, along with Solon and Stephen Woods, at least for a little while longer. I think it's going to stay with us. Frosty, before we went on break there, we were talking about the craziness in China. And I remember it hasn't been that long ago when you told me about the 52 lanes going around Beijing. But now
Correct.
evidently they're putting people in cages, Solon says, which I had to laugh. It's just so absurd.
There's no question. And hello to Salon and certainly Stephen. It's a pleasure to work with all three of you. And I think, again, my hope and my intention for these discussions is to bring a national discussion here in the United States of America on whether or not we want to continue importing millions and millions. In fact, the projections are we are going to add 140 million more people to the United States by 2050. And so I really want to preface this discussion and ask you, the listener, do you want to see your children living in America where we went from 300 million in the year of 2006 to 440 million by 2050. And that's only essentially 31 years from now. And anybody over the age of 40 or 50 knows how fast 30 years goes by. So I hope that these discussions really rouse your interest and give you an understanding of what your children face. And do you want to hand this kind of a civilization over to them? And so with that, having traveled all through China personally, I can tell you they are stacked, they're packed, they're bagged, and they're bogged, if you will, into that very small place, essentially, on the planet, one country that is about the same size as the contiguous United States, the lower 48. And they have environmental problems that are so extraordinary, so perverse, so deadly, and yet with 1.4 billion people and adding another 8 to 10 million each year, they can't solve them. And so when you hear such things as Solon said, that they could possibly be caging people, I know that they're putting they have some kind of a program right now where you've got to be a good person, you'll get a couple of good merits, and if you're a bad person, you get bad demerits with consequences. And so when you think about 1.4 billion people, trying to control that extraordinary mass of humanity with all of its deviations, if you will, with all of its aberrant behaviors and with all the consequences of packing and stacking and bagging people into such a really corrupted space, if you will. In other words, into apartments instead of touching the earth and touching the water and breathing clean air and all that goes with it. Yeah, China's got a lot of problems.
One of the things I just wanted to bring up is just some good news. There is some good news. Trump turned back those migrants from South America, didn't he?
Yes, he did. I think that thing is dissipating at this point in time. At the same time, I think Trump has got a whole bunch of problems with his personal finances and with just the entire his background and what he's done as a human being, he may have some really big problems coming his way, especially when the new democratically controlled House of Representatives takes power on January the 20th. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. At least if there is all sorts of discussion on impeachment and so forth, and depending on the facts that come out or don't come out. But, the one thing about this government, it's got in place all of the solutions, and that's why we have a vice president. So Mike Pence would be the next vice president in line for the office of presidency if there's a lot of problems with what happened and how Trump has conducted himself.
Do you guys remember the movie called, I think it's called Judge Dredd with Sylvester Stallone in it?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Didn't a lot of things happen? It sounds like China or something. Where people would get demerits if they would cuss or whatever, and all these things. Does that ring a bell to you there, Frosty?
Oh yeah, it does, and it does ring a bell. And I remember watching that thing. And again, if you look at 1984, or if you look at The Strange Death of Europe, if you look at many of the different, if you look at Jean Raspail's Camp of the Saints, we're really moving into those times, if you will. And in many ways, we've created our dilemma or our predicament, and it's going to be very interesting to see how it lives out.
What about civil war here in the U.S.? It seems to me that the deep state is literally driving a wedge between people. What are your thoughts on that?
There's no question. The deep state, if you want to call it that, the power brokers, the ones with a lot of money, the bankers of New York. Certainly the Federal Reserve is one of the most corrupt entities in the United States government. It was passed under Woodrow Wilson back in 1913, and it was just skullduggery. Instead of giving free banking and all that goes with a legal banking system, all these private bankers got together and created the Federal Reserve, of which they've controlled all these years. They literally have controlled all of it, and essentially have screwed the American people left, right, up, down, backwards, and forwards since 1913. And so you also have to understand this. There are extremists in every realm of humanity. Michael Phelps is an extreme swimmer. Lindsey Vonn is a extreme female skier. You've got Bezos, the guy that owns Amazon right now, is an extremely rich man. You've got extremists who are obviously the guy who shot up Strasbourg in Germany just this last week, and they finally caught him and he killed him in a hail of gunfire. He was an extremist. You have academics who are extremists, then they want to be the head of a university. All these kinds of different extremism are also played out, if you will, in the Darwinistic approach to power. And the government of the United States is, the person who goes for presidency of the United States, that person is an extremist. But there's also extremists that are sitting there on Wall Street, and they have been, and you call it the deep state or whatever you want to call it, they want to maintain their extraordinary power, and they'll do anything to keep it. And I really do think that Hillary Clinton was a part of that deep state where she was going to continue to flood the country with Syrian refugees, 100,000 of them, continue mass immigration from incompatible countries into this country to create so much multicultural chaos and conflict, cultural conflict, religious conflict, linguistic conflict, because it seems from what I've watched for the last 50 years after my schooling is that there are really forces out there that really want to undermine a constitutional republic. And that's what we're governed under. And if you look at what's happening in this country, I mean, there's so many really unintelligent, ignorant, and uneducated people in the United States. So much so, and it's very embarrassing, and they're easily led, and that's what the deep state really likes, because it's easy, just like in 1984, and certainly many of the other books that you read on the future. We're in the same boat right now, and there's no question that a man like Donald Trump kind of broke up the cartel of the deep state for a time.
Right.
I'm not sure how much longer that'll last, because,
Right.
again, you've got such powerful forces that whether it's ABC, NBC, CBS, certainly CNN, even NPR, they're all slanted with a very liberal slant. And in fact, I just wrote a piece just last week that was published called "The Pernicious." It's called "The Mainstream Media with a Pernicious Slant on the Truth," and that's why you don't hear anything about the connectiveness or the nexus between immigration flooding this country and the overpopulation crisis that it is exploding because of that immigration, when this country chose to reduce and actually stabilize its population back in 1960, 70, when women started having only 2 children per family on average. And it's been that way ever since. And so what's flooded this country is this unbelievable millions, 100 million immigrants in just 40 years, and another 100 million about to hit us within the next 30 years. And yet you see the deep state just is authoring that. And I, for one, don't understand why they want to destroy their own country. But again, extremists, there's no rhyme or reason to extremism as far as I can see.
Well, I think it's money. They must be getting paid by somebody.
Oh, there's no question. Money is their power. But what I don't understand is, why would you want to collapse the system? Because a $21 trillion debt quickly going to $22 trillion. Again, the second president of the United States, John Adams, says there are 2 ways to conquer a country. One is by the sword, and the other is by debt. And we're well on our way toward conquering or having this whole country and the whole financial system collapse. And then that means the deep state.
Are you there, Frosty? Solon, are you there?
Collapse underneath them. So I don't stand.
I think we're breaking up a little bit, guys. Can you hear me?
I hear you.
I can hear you.
Okay. We're getting some breakup, which is interesting. Yeah, I always wonder about that. I don't want to get off on a tangent. That almost took me off on a long tangent. But one of the things you brought up was Hillary. Frosty. And I think she may have led us into a war with Russia if she was in charge right now.
Oh, yeah.
Again, there's so many different sidebars to a war with Russia, any war with anybody that has a lot of power. I mean, there's no question a war with North Korea right now, we would take them out very quickly. But if we had a war, or even Iran, they would do some damage. But a war with Russia would be very protracted. And that's something I can't even imagine any 2 rational countries. And Putin's a smart guy. He doesn't want his country bombed or missiled, and certainly any of the other consequences. And of course, this country doesn't want to go there either. So all I know is that Hillary's propensities were very much in consequences, if you will, of flooding the country with all these incompatible immigrants with no understanding or simply no care of what they were going to cause. And so it's hard to guess on what she might have done.
It feels good to vent a little bit against these politicians.
Well, again, they're extremists, and extremists, they only have one card, if you will, and that's power. Power and money and power. I'm not sure what it all means, but that's what extremists do. And her whole life, Hillary Clinton has been a power broker. and she happened to hook up with a guy named Bill Clinton, who was a power broker and a sexual predator, and he got away with it. And he got away with it all. I think he had 5 draft deferments. He never even served. He did everything that anybody could do to make sure he didn't go into the military. Of course, and and a lot of thousands and thousands of other students. I had friends back at Michigan State University. They went to Canada. They went conscience objector. They served in a hospital for a couple of years. A lot of people did not want to go to that war, and simply because that war was so unethical. It was not confirmed by the Congress. It was by a president, and several presidents, Johnson and of course Nixon, and right on down the line, never declared. And all these kids died, about 58,272 actually. And it was my generation. And then we killed 2.3 million Vietnamese. It was absolutely a money banker's war, like the one that's going on right now, or the 2 that are going on in Iraq and Afghanistan. They're not accomplishing anything. They're just making money for that. Again, the power brokers that are up there in the power positions in New York City, essentially.
Okay, this is some interesting information about the Vietnam War that I just learned. And I don't know if you guys remember, there was a plane called the F-100, I believe it was, the Super Sabre, and it actually flew more missions in Vietnam than the P-51 flew in World War II. Can you believe that?
Well, more ordnance was dropped on Vietnam than was dropped in World War II.
That's incredible. Think about that. That's beyond my... we would have missions in World War II with 100 bombers.
Right. That's right. Yeah, but the World War II went on for 4 years. Vietnam went on for 10 years. And I've talked to enough veterans myself. The farce of it all, and the money that was poured into it, the waste, the airfields that were built, they had a complete open checkbook of the American public's money. In Vietnam, just like what's going on in Iraq and Afghanistan, and the kind of fraud that's going on. There are billions and billions, and I think I told last week, $5.9 trillion has been spent in 17 years now over there in Iraq and Afghanistan, 10,000 miles away, has absolutely accomplished absolutely nothing, has got about 5,000 of our kids killed. I don't know how many we've killed of theirs, and it's done nothing. And again, extremists don't care. Do you think that Hitler cared? Did Mussolini care? Did Stalin care? No, they didn't care. Death of a soldier is just another piece of power that they can maintain while they're still in power. Well, that's what's going on over in Afghanistan. And those Halliburton and certainly Blackwater and all of the rest of them that are part of the military-industrial complex, kids that are dying and certainly serving and dying, and they think they're serving for freedom. They're not serving for anything but the banker's wallet. And that's fact. I mean, that's what's going on. And I've learned that in my lifetime. And it's just the way it is. And it breaks my heart, because I could have been one of those victims myself. I mean, I was right there in the middle of the Vietnam War.
Oh, were you?
And I was in the United States Army. I was a second lieutenant, MSc.
Were you in any of the battles?
No. I was at the end of the war. I graduated in 1970, and then they started cleaning out the MSc ranks, and so I served down in Fort Sam Houston and Fort Riley and Fort Benning, and so I got to see the nightmare of what happens to you when you have shrapnel all over your body, burn patients with amputations, and I was depressed 24/7. It was a god awful existence to see all these kids just blown up, and they got shipped back to Brooke Army Hospital. Their faces burned with jellied gasoline and napalm. I'm telling you, war is really ugly. I mean, it is ugly beyond anyone's understanding, and it's not fun, and it's really a tragedy for everyone, and especially young kids.
There's a lot of psychological damage that occurs to these soldiers, and they have a lot of suicides now, don't they?
Oh yeah, I think the latest that I heard was something like 22 suicides a year. a day. 22 suicides a day right now going on from the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. It's unbelievable. More soldiers have committed suicide. More soldiers have committed suicide than have died in Iraq and Afghanistan in the last 17 years. And I think it's about more than 4,500 or close to 5,000 people of soldiers have died in Iraq and Afghanistan, but more have killed themselves from suicides.
Solon, I know you're really anti-war, against war. Do you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I didn't actually know that you were a baby boomer.
Oh yeah, I'm 72 years old. I'm a lead baby boomer.
Oh, okay. Yeah, my dad actually he didn't actually ever want to talk about that, because he had talked about when he came back, they had started to label them baby killers and all kinds of other things, and I feel like this is a war that happened that no one talks about, and yet it seems like we're going to repeat this because, of the reality that this is allowed to continue to go on.
Well, you're right. And the problem is most Americans are so apathetic toward the Vietnam War now. They're totally apathetic because they don't have to serve. Less than 1% of Americans serve anymore. They just don't serve. And so the American public really doesn't even know that the Iraq and Afghanistan wars are going on. I think there was a couple of guys just got killed over in Afghanistan a week ago, and they reported that. But because if you're not serving, you could care less. And in fact, the lottery came in when I was a college senior, and that stopped the anti-war movement, because all of a sudden, more than half, once if you were less than 140 on the lottery, you weren't going to get drafted. So at that point, you didn't care. And so now, with only a volunteer force, it's a private army, and that private army is being funded and paid for by the U.S. taxpayer, and they simply nobody cares, and that's why the thing's going on. So the military-industrial complex gets to keep running its money and profits, and the munitions and the jets and the big contracts, and that's what's going on. And that's what went on in Vietnam the same way. That's why that war was protracted.
You know what's interesting about all of this in terms of the military-industrial complex has become so corrupted. A lot of the equipment that we're producing now is really bad. Like the F-35 is a terrible airplane. Can't turn, can't climb. It's slow. It wouldn't stand a chance against an F-16 or an F-15 in a real dogfight, but it costs millions and millions and millions of dollars more than the current planes we have.
Oh yeah, in fact, billions for the research on that plane, and then it came out, and then they were going to get rid of the Warthog too. Mm-hmm. But I guess and that was one of the best airplanes in the war arena, and finally they said, no, we better keep this one. This one's that good, and so they are continuing to build that one. But again, the kind of fraud, the kind of corruption that's going on in the military-industrial complex with U.S. taxpayer dollars, if we all knew the total truth of this thing, I mean, it's extraordinary how these immoral, unethical, and amoral people in high places could care less of how they screw the American taxpayer, mislead the American taxpayer, and of course they always tell you, oh, we're fighting for freedom. I guarantee you, we didn't fight for freedom over in Vietnam. Right, because that was my time, and we sure as heck aren't doing any freedom fighting over in Afghanistan and Iraq. Nothing. We're doing nothing that's doing anything for the United States or freedom here in the United States, except we've lost essentially $6 trillion and all the lives completely wasted. And then when you think about all those kids that have committed suicide, I can tell you, anybody seen the movie Full Metal Jacket? When that kind of chubby guy with the drill sergeant sits there and just raises heck with him, and he's a maggot, he's a scumbag, and he's a piece of trash. He completely has no. He's just totally.
Is that Is that your call?
Yeah, it's my call, and I just get rid of it. So
Okay.
anyway, the key here is he finally blew away the sergeant, and he was
Yeah.
sitting on the toilet. Then he blew himself away. Well, that's happening. I think at this point it's 22, literally suicides a day. I think I'm almost positive that's what it's unbelievable amount of suicides going on.
You know, you brought up the A-10, and the guy I like to listen to talk about this is a fellow by the name of Pierre Spray, and he designed both the F-16 and the A-10, two of the best airplanes we've ever had. And he just goes on and on about the F-35 and why it's a terrible plane. And he says even the F-22 is not really a good fighter plane.
Yeah, well, again, there's so many boondoggles out there. There's so many munitions boondoggles. The thing is, when they carry on war, they get to experiment on all the different ways of killing people. And they've come up with extraordinary ways. They've got bombs that burst over a battlefield that literally in pods. And then the pods come down to the ground level, and then they explode 20 feet above the ground and just slaughter people. With these bursting pods that come out of the main bomb itself. So
is that
yeah,
the cluster?
I'll tell you what, it's grisly.
Is that the cluster bomb you're talking about?
Cluster bombs, yeah.
Those are incredible. Have you ever seen films of those?
Yes, I have.
It's like something out of a sci-fi movie or something.
Right.
Totally
Right.
Crazy.
Now, human beings are clever and crazy and insane and determined. When it comes to war, nothing. When it comes to war, there is no morality, and there are no heroes. It is a really ugly business, war.
This has been a very interesting side tangent. I could go on and on here because I just think this kind of stuff is so interesting. But did you want to cover something from specifically in your book today, or?
Well, we can certainly, go and talk about the aspect of the overpopulation crisis that we're facing, and the key is that this overpopulation dilemma for America will be the greatest crisis facing America, essentially, and in the entire existence of America. That's what's coming. And the people that don't see it, they can avoid it for a while. But again, as I've said, in 1861, it was just brilliant what the incredible writer Mark Twain said: silent assertion. Just keep ignoring something until the thing blows up. And that's what we're doing right now. We're ignoring it until the whole thing blows up.
Well, one of the things that you said last show, and I don't remember the exact figure, it was right around 90 million barrels or 95 million barrels of oil that we're burning up per day. I went out and did some checks on that, and what I've seen on Wikipedia now, they're saying 99.5 million barrels of oil were burnt per day in 2018.
Well, then that means, and those figures that I gave you, 94 million barrels of oil burned every day, that was from a year ago. So, and a year ago, that means a year ago, there's been added 80 million more people net gain to the planet since a year ago.
80
when
million.
I did that research. Yeah, 80 million, actually 83 million humans have been added to the earth this year. So now we'll have a new slate for 2019, and we're going to add another 83 million. So very much so, it could have gone, it probably is. It's jumped from 94 million barrels of oil to 99 million barrels of oil. And as I said, it's going to quickly go within the next 11 years. By 2030, it'll go to 200 a million barrels of oil per day, because China is going to be burning 98 million barrels of oil on their own, because they are simply building, as I said, 27 million new cars each year, net gain to their highways.
I can't even wrap my mind around these statistics. 99.5 million barrels per day being burned. Just the pollution alone, I'm surprised we're still alive.
Yeah, we're doing amazing damage. And I actually talk about that in my chapter 4, and it's called "Oil Created a 100-Year Window That's Closing." And James Howard Kunstler wrote the book "The Long Emergency," which is about running out of oil. And he said, and I'm quoting, "The cheap oil age created an artificial bubble of plenitude for a period not much longer than a human lifetime. So I hazard to assert that as oil ceases to be cheap and the world reserves move toward depletion, we will be left with an enormous population of 10.1 billion people that the ecology of the earth will not support. The journey back toward non-oil population homeostasis will not be pretty. We will discover the hard way that the population hypergrowth was simply a side effect of the age of oil. It was a condition, not a problem with a solution. That is what happened, and we are stuck with it," unquote.
One of the things, there's so many important ideas to kind of cover, and I talk about this too much, where I talk about the analogy people make of fitting all the people in the world in Texas, 7.5 billion people or whatever, and that if you're going to turn them into Texans, they should all be able to eat some meat. And I say if you give them, a cow, they can eat 500 pounds of meat in their lifetime. Well, if you live 100 years, that's 5 pounds per year that you would get, which is not very much beef. But if you take 7 billion cows for the 7 billion people and you give them 2 acres to graze in, then you got 14 billion acres, which is 21 million square miles. And I know I'm repeating myself, but that's all of the United States, Canada, Russia, and South America. So we could fit all the people in Texas, but we just can't feed them. To talk a little bit more about cows, if you don't give them grass fed, like I was saying, giving them 2 acres to eat grass, well, then you have to substitute grain, and you have to give them as high as 24 pounds of grain per day. And from what I hear is that grain isn't even really healthy for cows. Is that correct, Frosty?
That's correct. Cows are meant, literally, their DNA is stamped to eat grass. And that's what creates a cow. And again, the number is 16 pounds of grain to put only 1 pound of meat on a cow, and 2,500 gallons of water to put 1 pound of meat on a cow. So you can see it's not very efficient to do that. And again, those numbers just blow your mind, because what it takes to create 16 pounds of grain, and the water that it takes, and then the harvesting of all that grain, and then, of course, pumping of all that water is extraordinary. So, yeah, the United States is beyond spoiled and has been living way past what is called overshoot, and it's going to catch up to us very quickly here in the next 30 years. I mean, we're in so much trouble on so many different levels. It's almost beyond anyone's understanding or comprehension levels.
I love to research your statistics, because whenever I do that, it's like I get this whole education. And it's so interesting. For example, you're talking about how much cows drink per day. And from what I've been able to scrounge around and find, that a cow may drink between 30 to 3 gallons per day of water, from 3 to 30 gallons. It depends on the age, the body size, the stage of production, the environment, like the temperature that they're in. But 30 gallons of water, that's a day. That's a lot of water.
Well, did I also tell you that they excrete 50 pounds of feces? I think I gave you that. 50 pounds.
I should have wrote that down. 50 pounds per day.
I think it's 43 to 50 pounds of fecal matter every day. Yeah, a cow. I mean, they just crap the living daylights out of the barnyard.
It's completely, it's an irony that if you're going to eat meat, if you're going to have your population eat meat, you have to shrink your population way down, right?
Oh, that's exactly correct. Again, in my book, I go, you have got to get below the carrying capacity and the tragedy of the commons. You have to get within the carrying capacity of the land and the resources and the water and the food for any given species. Otherwise, that species is doomed to crash.
Well, one of the other statistics that you gave us a while back was how many people die annually from starvation. And out at theworldcounts.com, I found that it's like, what is that number? 30 million?
Yeah, that's what you said. And that's better research than mine. My research showed for this book was 4 million children every year and 8 million adults, which came to 12 million human beings who starve to death every year. But
It's
now
probably,
you've come to 30. So I would go probably that the 30 is probably more better research.
well, what happens is we're on such an acceleration, aren't we? That these
Yes, yeah.
statistics are changing so quickly you can't even keep up with them, right?
That's correct. Like here, I've got 94 million barrels of oil every day, and then you're already back up to 99 million.
Yeah.
So things are racing ahead so fast and so out of control that there is no way to control. And then so the only solution, again, as I've said, and you're talking the same language, is the Darwin solution. And that the Darwin solution is the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And that's the saddest thing, because we have the ability to change course, to do this differently. And of course, the United States and Canada and certainly Europe and certainly all of Australia did that since 1970. But the rest of the world, as I said in my previous statements, raced ahead by 4.1 billion people, and with no responsibility whatsoever. I mean, places like China, total irresponsibility. India, completely irresponsible. Mexico, totally irresponsible. South America, totally irresponsible. The Catholic Church, totally irresponsible. The Muslim Church, completely, horrendously irresponsible. All these ancient religions are still vying for power. And of course, more babies means more power and more money in the, it's funny too. I find it rather ironic. I think that the Vatican under the Pope is worth something like $50 billion. I don't know the exact number, but whatever the unbelievable amount of financial power the Vatican possesses, why doesn't it take all that money and go help the poor with schools, with food, with education, with cleanliness and disease prevention? But instead, you get, the Pope is an extremist, and the cardinals are extremists, and they like their little power positions, and they're farcical on so many levels because they don't do a darn thing to alleviate the world's poor.
Solon, I know you must have some comment on all of this. Are you still there?
Yeah. I definitely think the biggest problem, I like that you put that oil help bring this into play. However, it didn't, but it's going to all tumble. I wish I could recite it. I don't have it in front of me. And I also imagine you feel that capitalism is kind of causing a lot of these problems as well.
Oh, no question. Capitalism is the most irresponsible kind of economic system. That's why I've always, in the last 10, 15 years now, knowing Brian Check, Steady State Economics, read his book, Throwing Coal into a Runaway Train. We need to live within the carrying capacity, and we need to have populations that are within the carrying capacity. So steady state economics is the new economic system that has production and consumption and pollution all in balance with the carrying capacity, so that the human species can thrive from now and 100 years from now. But the capitalistic system is absolutely geared to collapse, because it's like a cancer cell. It always mandates endless growth, endless production, endless consumption, and endless pollution. And therefore, at some point, it outstrips the planet's ability to maintain balance. and collapses the environment, collapses the water systems, the arable land systems, you name it, resource systems all get collapsed. That's what's coming. There's no doubt about that. There's no question. That's what's coming.
It's very interesting if you look at this, and I'm really glad we've had the opportunity to have you on the show on a regular basis, Frosty, because it really opens your eyes to what the real issues are.
Yeah.
And what's really going on. And if you can not let it affect your emotions and just go in and study this stuff, like these statistics you bring to us, every time I get one of these statistics, I go and do some checks and cross references, and I find out you're being really conservative. And
Yeah.
it's actually worse than what you're saying.
Right. I understand. And I did all the research on this book over a year ago, and so everything is multiplying again by 83 million new babies in that year. And as I tweak this book, now I'm going to go back and get the 99 million barrels of oil per day being burned. I'll have to get new stats on the coal. I mean, the United States is burning something like 3.15 tons, a million tons of coal every year. The United States alone. Can you imagine what it is over in China? So yeah, there's no question. The oceans are getting all of this, the particulate, the acid rain raining into the oceans, the carbon raining into the oceans. Yeah, it is incomprehensible for most people. And it's hard to get your mind around this stuff because it's that horrific.
And I think personally that the extreme weather is part of the side effect of all the destruction that we're doing to the biosphere.
You would be correct. As I said, when I worked in Antarctica, I remember this. He was a National Science Foundation head. Rutledge was his name, and I went into his office and I said, "My God, these global warming models are showing tremendous consequences." And he says, "Yeah, catastrophic climate destabilization. It's not that you wouldn't have all these hurricanes coming in out of the Gulf. It's just that as the waters warm even more aberrantly because of all the carbon dumped into the oceans, that it exacerbates and a megaphone effect, if you will, to the, whether it was Katrina or Harvey or Sandy or Haiyan down there in the Philippines, and the latest one that went across Florida, Michael, all those hurricanes, they got magnified. And once they got magnified is because of that exchange of the warm ocean water and then the cold air above, and it just whipped them into 100. You ought to see it down in Antarctica, 200-mile-an-hour katabatic winds. That's a normal deal down there because of the extraordinary differences when the change of seasons happens. But down in Antarctica, it doesn't bother anybody. But when you have it up here in North America, coming off that Gulf, you got yourself a butt-kicking storm coming in, and we're going to see a whole bunch more of them, because long before Katrina hit in my lifetime, we never had anything like this. I mean,
No.
they come in, the little old storm, no big deal.
Right.
We got 150, 200-mile norms. We got those quick tornadoes that are just off the charts, 150-mile-an-hour off-the-chart tornadoes. Well, you better believe it's because we are imbalancing the climate of the world and the biosphere.
Stephen's still with us, which I'm glad. I thought he was going to have to leave. Stephen, you had a question. Go ahead.
Yeah. Hey, Frosty, what do you know about methane gas being released in the Arctic areas?
Oh, yeah, the Siberia, as a matter of fact, I've touched on that. And again, it's not much noted, but as the warming, by like 1 degree Celsius per 10 years or whatever, you're having the ice that's in Siberia is starting to release the methane gases. And of course, I don't know if anybody knows this or not, some of the greatest danger from all these cows, 1 billion, whatever the 1.4 billion, I think 1.5 billion cows in America and around the world, because everybody wants to have their steak and their hamburger, and Arby's can't wait to have its 15 different sandwiches stuck with steak. All these cows are giving off all this methane, and this methane's doing some tremendous damage to the biosphere, and it's going to be interesting to see how much more it affects the climate as we proceed with this.
Is it accurate? Like it's 20 times worse or something? I just remember hearing something 20 times worse than other kinds of global warming.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The methane factor is, again, like I say, it's a good thing I went skiing yesterday and just let my mind relax and enjoy, because this is the kind of stuff I have in my mind from all of this research, this book itself. And, you can sit there and listen to NBC and ABC, and they're all chasing all these ridiculous stories. And you get to hear Ellen DeGeneres, celebrating all these people and doing all this bunch of really inane and absolutely just completely off the wall, silly stuff, when this country should really start dealing with, and the 60 Minutes, it tells all these stories that just are not going to do anything to further this civilization and its ability to survive the 21st century. And you won't get anything from NPR. NPR literally slants away from anything. The same thing with PBS, because somebody is controlling the levers of power to make sure this information is not given out to the American people. So the American people are completely ignorant about what's coming for their children.
It's interesting. I think people are like escaping into video games and movies and into kind of unreality.
Oh, yeah. It's called cognitive dissonance. And that's an intellectual denial of reality. And if you've got parents that are just watching TV, and again, the average male watches 4.1 hours of television every day, 7 days a week. You can look that up. That's 35 hours a week. The average female watches 29 hours. And so you better believe it. People are escaping. They're sitting on their butts. They're not getting involved. Half of them don't vote in the national elections. Around 90% don't vote in local elections. So nobody really knows who's really serving this country and serving, on the governorships and the senators and the House reps. And that's why you've got so much corruption in the United States Congress. I mean, I'd like to just dig into what goes on with somebody like Maxine Waters or Nancy Pelosi or Hudson or Hank Johnson down there in Georgia, or any of them. Even my own two here in Denver, Cory Gardner and certainly Michael Bennet. Michael Bennet is an intellectual airhead, yet he's got a PhD in education. Yet he's the one that gave the amnesty in Senate Bill 744 back in 2013. After I gave his office all the information on what was going to happen and to reduce all immigration down to less than 100,000 a year, he jacked it up to 2 million a year. 2 million in that bill. I was beside myself. And then I went down to the main office lady. I said, what did you do with all that information I gave you? Well, we're going to stand with Michael Bennet because we feel that this bill has a good chance of passing. And in fact, it didn't it passed the Senate, but didn't pass the House. And that's when Barack Obama finally came out and gave the DACA a reward for all those illegals. So you sit here and you've got all these people, whether it's the anchor babies or whether it's the unbelief. Look at this country. We could have manufactured everything and put all of our people to work. Instead, 90% of all the goods that come out of Home Depot and Lowe's and all the stores and all that are all made in China. I mean, it makes no sense when we've got 1.5 million homeless any given day in America, and we've got at least 4 million are still unemployed in America, and we got 44 million on food stamps. None of it makes sense. But then again, politics and politicians make no sense.
I think we got about 7 minutes left to the end of the show. Make sure you mention your website and make sure you mention your books. I'm going to put one thing out there real quick if we have enough time. I was watching this discussion between these three ex-CIA guys who the CIA had turned on, and now their lives are very difficult. They're trying to survive. It's very interesting. One of the fellows' name was Bill Benny, and he was advocating that we pick our politicians using a kind of draft where people are picked kind of randomly, just like jury duty or something. He said you wouldn't have all the corruption, and they wouldn't be any less capable than the people we have now.
That's not such a bad idea. To do a lottery system and vote or have them run and then have the lottery system to pick them out. You have a better chance. But for the love of God and common sense, we definitely need term limits. You have to get somebody like Dianne Feinstein or Barbara Boxer, who I think she's out now, but Dianne Feinstein just ran again, got elected. She's going to go till she's 92.
Oh my!
And she's not in touch with what's going on. She's got cognitive degradation. I mean, she's an old woman. She's completely not able to function in the 21st century like this, and yet she's a U.S. senator. And so, there should absolutely be term limits and get them kicked out. Give them 10 years into the Congress and the Senate, and then kick them out and get somebody else in there that's going to function in 2019, not back in 1960. And for those of you, if you're really concerned that you're listening, and this series that Mark and I are doing along with Stephen and Solon, this is your future. And I'm spelling it out for you. Mm-hmm. And, Jean Raspail with the Camp of the Saints spelled it out for France, and they ignored him. I can tell you what I'm talking about and what Mark's talking about and actually validating, that's what's coming at this country. But my website's, howtolivealifeofadventure.com, and that's fun. I got a new book coming out next month, Old Men Bicycling Across America, A Journey Beyond Old Age. This new book coming out, America's Overpopulation Predicament, Blindsiding Future Generations, will come out in March. And then again, if you want to take hold of this, numbersusa.org or .com, numbersusa, NUMBERS, USA.com or .org. Download Immigration Off the Charts, 10-minute video that'll blow your mind as you visually can see what's coming at this country. And then the other one is, Immigration, Gumballs, and Poverty. It's a 5-minute video. I mean, I think I've sent it to you, Mark. I've sent it out to all of your people. If the American people saw these two videos, even as out of touch and uneducated or ignorant about what's coming, if all of the American people saw these two videos, there would be a national clamoring, just like what's happening over in France right now, to shut the borders down. And if you want further information, capsweb.org and capsweb.org, and certainly national, it's a carryingcapacitynetwork.com. Those three will educate you so much, and you can also send in pre-written faxes you can add to them to say what you want. And there's over 10 million people are now in those organizations. So you would just add to the power and empower yourself. And if you have any questions or you want me to discuss anything on Mark's show, just frostyw@juno.com, or you can contact me through my website. You can contact me on Frosty Wooldridge, my Facebook page. And we can do something to change the course of history, and it could actually come from a series like this in the middle of America with some common sense thinking, with some common sense research. And I'm just an all-American boy. I mean, that's just all I am. I'm just a farm boy from Michigan, and I've learned a lot. And I want this country to succeed. I want our civilization to thrive. And either we do and take action to move it toward thriving, or again, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse are going to be the future for our children. Am I clear on that, Mark? I just want to make sure that I'm clear on that.
Oh, I think you're very clear. And I never thought studying population could be so interesting.
Yes.
If you can kind of pull yourself back a little bit, not get involved emotionally in it too much, and just analyze the statistics and see what all this means. It's like the thing you were saying about the number of barrels we burn per day was I guess it's 99.5 million now. Mm-hmm. We burn per day. That is an insanity. Our society is insane, and it's rushing headlong to its own destruction, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Oh, absolutely. Yes, it is. Because when this oil runs out, and I've got some of the figures I've got we're going to have some major production dips in 2025. I just got that from my friend Terry McNeil out in Connecticut, whom I keep in touch with. And he says pretty much what Kunstler says at the Hubbard curve and all of the scientific knowledge is that virtually all oil will get extraordinarily scarce by 2050, and then it'll be done by 2075. There will be no more oil by 2075, probably sooner, actually.
And Frosty, you've put out your information to a lot of radio shows. Are you going to be probably on a lot of other programs here soon?
You know, I talked to Michael Harrison, who is a big time radio. He's a public relations man, and I said I want to get on 60 Minutes, and I was going to pay him some money, and he's very interested in me. I said I want to pay. I want to get on 60 Minutes. I want to get on NPR. I want to be right in front of either Leslie Stahl or Scott Pelley or Steve Croft or Forrest Whitaker or any of those people. And I want to get on NPR, Steve Inskeep, Terry Gross, and bring this information, and PBS. And he wrote me back and he says, you know, we just, you are a little bit over, he literally told me that, he says, to try to get you on those shows is a little bit delusional. And I said, look, I'm a big thinker. I'm a big actor. I play it big because I don't play it small. And I said, delusional. I said, somebody gets on Tucker Carlson. Somebody gets on 60 Minutes. Somebody gets on NPR. I said, why not me? And he said, well, it's extraordinarily difficult. I said, but this is about our country. And anyway, he's not taking me on because he does whatever his reasons. He thinks that I'm not going to be able to get on any of those programs. And I said, I don't want to waste my money. If I'm going to pay you money, I want to get on the programs that are going to make impact. And so I'm not sure how much or how far I'll get in the coming year with the addresses of all these different, radio and TV shows.
Thank you so much, Frosty. It's always great to talk to you. We are out of time. Thank you again, sir. Good night.
All right, sir, and Merry Christmas, and we'll talk to you next week.
All right, bye-bye.